What if I told you Zion Williamson played more games than you actually think this season? Plus assistant coaching changes and more in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday. Missed yesterday's show, was in the Jazz Fest kind of vibe and everything here, but we're going to make it up to you today with a show that's jam-packed with a number of different topics. We're going to look at how many games Zion Williamson played, didn't play. There's more that goes into that than you realize, and it actually comes out better than you might even think. Plus, I want to look at some assistant coaching stuff with the team, not news on that per se, but there's something going to be very telling about that, and I'll tell you what it is in the second segment. And then I want to look at the Pistons' three-point shooting numbers during the Joe Dumars era. The insight is kind of surprising. We're going to break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. So let's get into this one around Zion Williamson. My premise on this is Zion played, and that's in air quotes, more games than you maybe think. And I think that changes the narrative around him in an important way. Zion Williamson officially this year played just 30 games. A pretty low number in something that looks like it's just derailing his career. It's leading to a lot of very valid, in my opinion, criticism towards him as well, but also maybe leading to the Pelicans to wanting to trade him, right? You know, with the off-court stuff and all that. Look, you can put up with all of that if a guy's playing games, but 30 games this season isn't going to get it done. And only 2 years that he's had in the NBA where he's played above 60 games certainly isn't it. And he has 3 of the healthy seasons that he's played where he's played 30 games or fewer. 24 his rookie year, 29 games in 22, 23, and then 30 games this past year. And that's counting a year where he just didn't play at all. So of his 6 seasons, 4 of them have fewer than 30 games played. Not great. Here's the thing though. What if I told you Zion Williamson kind of played like 50-something games this year? Would that kind of change it in your opinion? Forget the stats, forget that he actually didn't, but let's just say I told you he played 52 games, 56 games, something like that this year. Does that change things for you? Should that change things for you? So let's get into this a little bit here. Zion Williamson had a weird start to the year, missing the first game. And look, sometimes illnesses and things like that happen. You know, played in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games before being inactive for 2 more. Then against Cleveland, got hurt, didn't end up played in that game, didn't play again because of the hamstring injury. After that, he missed 30 games. So that's 33 games right there that I would consider valid that he didn't play. 33 games. Everything else after that is a little bit different, in my opinion, when it comes down to some of the injuries that he had. He made his return in a loss against Minnesota on, where's the date? January 7th. And after he came back, he was not going to play back-to-backs. So when you look at that, that takes out about 9 games missed due to him not playing back-to-backs per the team, right? He came out on the record and even said, team doesn't want me to play in back-to-backs. I feel like I can play in back-to-backs. So let's add 9. Let's just remove, he said he could play. And I think when we watched him, he could have played in back-to-backs. They were being cautious with this injury. So let's add those 9 back-to-back games in there, right? So that's 39 games played all of a sudden. Then towards the end of the season, you know, he played his last game on March 19th, day after my birthday there, and never played again. there are 5 games that he just missed, didn't play, leading up to the beginning of April. At this point, the team was actively tanking. He had a back contusion is what he was officially listed out as, but maybe that's just kind of cover of the team just shutting people down. He missed 5 games. Let's add those 5 games back in for Zion Williamson. So he's got 30 games played, plus 9 due to missing back-to-backs, plus 5, right? That's 44 games all of a sudden that he is kind of up to that, like, we think he could have played. Maybe he was injured during that time, maybe not, but the team was tanking as they should have tanked in the first place too. Keep that in mind. That's 44 games. Then it was officially announced on March 31st that he was shut down for the remainder of the season, him and CJ McCollum. So again, actively tanking here. After that, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more games when he was just shut down for the season. So we're up to 44 games. Let's add 7 to it. It's 51 games. 51 games that it feels like Zion Williamson could have played. Didn't play in them. That's an important thing to note in all of this. But feels like he could have played in those 51 games or a closer number to it. Maybe it's not exactly 51. Maybe it's 48, whatever it might be, right? Maybe you want to put those 5 games due to the back contusion in there, but it feels like he could have played through a lot of that. 51 games compared to 30 is a pretty significant difference. And that 30 number is largely because this team failed this year, right? They were a disaster. They were bad. And because they were bad, they prioritized their upcoming draft pick, right? The draft lottery is less than 2 weeks away right now. That's not Zion's fault per se. That's the team making a choice right there. And again, it's the correct choice. That's what they should have done this season. So I'm not faulting them for it. But it does change maybe how we view Zion Williamson a little bit, particularly when you look at the way he was playing when he was healthy out there on the court. Now, it was on a minutes restriction. He wasn't playing over 30 minutes per game pretty much, right? During that stretch from his return to injury, he only played above 30 minutes in 2 games. Not great, but he looked incredible during that stretch. Looked like a guy that you can build a team around. So if we view this through the lens that we were just talking about, right, of 30 games played, but before that it was 70 games. All of a sudden, if he was playing 70 games this season, 51 games, 52 games, whatever the number was, I forget, this season, I view this differently a little bit, right? Do you? I'm asking that. It's an honest question. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube, because I think that changes maybe the way we view Zion Williamson and the narratives that are kind of out there around him. Maybe the team still wants to trade him because they don't like the off-court stuff, and it still remains then that 3 of his 6 seasons he hasn't played more than 30 games. That's a very valid thing, even if when you take this out of there, right? Still worry about injuries. That hamstring injury that caused him to miss 30 games this year is a big concern because he's had recurring hamstring injuries. But I do think it changes how we view him a little bit. It maybe makes you, if you're skeptical about building around him for the future, or more importantly, the team, Joe Dumars, all that, maybe that makes you want to build around him a little bit more. If it looks like it went from 70 games to 51, 52 games in what would have been a lost season either way. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I thought that was kind of interesting to look at when I dove into his season a little bit more. We'll have more on Zion Williamson in next week's shows here on Locked On Pelicans. So coming up next, assistant coaches. That's really going to tell us something big time about Willie Green next season. I'll tell you what that is. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Went to Jazz Fest. Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and I save even more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Are you saving up to buy a house, a car, maybe just a big purchase at the end of the month? Monarch is going to be able to help you accomplish all of that. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. It's going to be an exciting upcoming year with the draft and everything. There's some news you'll hear about in the future with Locked On Pelicans as well that I'm very excited about as well. I'm just throwing in the most vague tease possible for a reason there, but it sounds cool. So subscribe. And for your second listen today, go to Locked On NBA Game Night. I'm actually on there today making sense of that Jalen Brunson game winner. Oh my goodness, was that fun. So make Locked On NBA Game Night every game, every night until an NBA champion is crowned your second listen today. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts. So I want to get into something about assistant coaches. It's not news of changes or things like that. I want to get into what it would mean here. This was something I was thinking about today. You know, it sounds like head coach Willie Green is safe. Now, you might feel one way about that. You might feel another. That's besides the point here. He's safe. Ownership seems to like him. Joe Dumars seems to like him. Now, do we really know how they feel? No. But if you want more of a clue, the assistant coaches are going to tell you. That's going to really tell us how Joe Dumars feels about Willie Green. That's going to tell us how ownership feels about Willie Green. Are they just keeping Willie Green because he's got one more year on his contract? Maybe. You know, there's moments where they could be doing that just because the team wants to be cheap or if they want to see what he can do with a fully healthy roster. But the way you kind of know is assistant coaching changes. Right? Willie Green, over his time here, has slowly built up the assistant coaches here to be people he trusts, the people he wants to bring in to this team, right? There were some holdovers from the Stan Van Gundy era or other eras, and like they decided to make some changes and slowly but surely kind of bring people in, right? And you feel like someone like James Borrego even was more of a David Griffin hire here because he didn't fully trust head coach Willie Green. So a year ago, they bring in James Borrego to help with the offense and kind of have him there just in case you want to fire Willie Green, which the reporting says David Griffin wanted to do this season and was overruled. So does Willie Green want James Borrego on staff or not? I could not tell you. I'm not going to try and project either way on this. But if they make some big changes to the assistant coaching staff, that would probably seem to me to indicate, at least on the surface, and it might not be this, let me be clear with that they don't have a lot of faith in head coach Willie Green. Go to Memphis this past year, right? They fired their head coach Taylor Jenkins during the season in a shocking manner. You know, they had forced him to hire other assistants, including one that they promoted to be their interim head coach. You do that when you don't believe in your head coach, right? When you're like, I don't know if this guy's doing it here. We need to get some help here in maybe people that are a little bit more loyal to the front office than they are to the head coach. You know, Willie Green's got, for the most part, I'd say a staff that's loyal to him that he wants to have here. And I think they've got some really smart people. I'm very high on Jarron Collins and what he's done for this defense, right? So you have a number of people that, you know, can really do some great things and are Willie Green's guys. If Joe Dumars comes in and is like, all right, I've got a mandate from ownership to keep Willie Green, even though we know Joe Dumars and him are friends and they think very highly of each other. He's like, this isn't really the guy that I want. You've got to wonder if he's going to come in and they're going to make some changes to the assistant coaching staff and bring in some other people here to not like put pressure on head coach Willie Green, but put some of their own people in there to kind of influence how the head coach is operating. And look, that can breed dysfunction. Look at, again, Memphis. I don't think that was a great situation for anybody there, especially after their first round exit. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes down to it as well. But bringing in some big staff changes when you're like, oh, those aren't Willie Green's people, or, you know, and it's tough to know whether they are or not. And I would assume anyone who's hired is going to work well with him and he will embrace anyone who's hired. That's the type of thing that I think, and maybe this is reading too much into it, right? Like that kind of says like, oh, Joe Dumars isn't like the biggest Willie Green fan and he might try and make a change there the first chance he's really allowed to. Now, he did the right thing, on the record stating there are no mandates or anything like that, which, as we talked about the other day on the show, part of your job is covering for people higher up than you. That's just kind of how this goes. It's even covering up for the players and things like that as well. So, it's on the record that he's like, well, I'll make my own decision here. Maybe he is, maybe he's not, right? He said the right thing. Of course he was going to say that. Whether he has mandates or not, I kind of assumed when we went into that press conference that no matter what, there were not going to be any, he was going to deny any mandates or anything like that. But if there is a mandate, let's roll with that for a second. Maybe the way you kind of get around some of that is, well, we're going to make assistant coaching changes. And that then kind of makes it easier to make a move next season when, again, Willie Green is on, in theory, an expiring deal unless they give him some sort of extension. And if that ends up being the case, you make a change, he can kind of elevate one of his people that maybe would be someone he would be looking at to be the head coach just long-term for the future. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on as the coaching carousel eventually starts to heat up. And it's not insane in the NBA this year. The Sacramento Kings elevated Doug Christie from interim to just being their head coach. Willie Green seems safe here. So you have an opening in Phoenix, and anywhere else I can't even remember off the top of my head. It's not a ton of changes, and we'll see what ends up happening. With Memphis, I guess they technically have an opening. Same thing for Denver. They technically have an opening when it comes down to it. So that's, the coaching carousel is not in full spin. And I don't know if it's going to be crazy this year for everything, but, you'll start to see that heat up a little bit in the future. And I think it might be a little bit revealing in a sense of what it means for head coach Willie Green. So coming up next, let's look at the Joe Dumars era in Detroit and some of the three-point shooting. I think it's kind of interesting, right? That ties into one of the biggest concerns about Joe Dumars and this hire that I've heard, not just from fans, but other people in the media as well. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And let me know if you're an everydayer in the comments down below. Let me know who you were excited to see at Jazz Fest. I went really to go see Cage the Elephant on Thursday, and that was awesome. Hung out, by the way, with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today. More sense of what's going on with Derek Carr, the draft, the future of the black and gold. We've got a schedule release coming up in a couple of weeks here. It's an exciting time. Go make Locked On Saints your second listen today. So let's dive into some of the numbers behind Joe Dumars and his tenure in Detroit. One of the biggest concerns I think people have had from him is he's not been the lead executive for a team in 10 years. His final year in Detroit was the 2013-2014 season. And one of the biggest questions I get is, has the game passed him by? And look, there's no way to know that. There's no way to know that, right? Yeah, he hasn't been a lead executive in a while, but he's been around the NBA. And while his tenure in Detroit, there's a big downhill era there of about 6 years that was not great, really not great. It doesn't mean you can't change, you can't learn, you can't grow, you can't put good people around you, right? And so that's why whenever someone has asked me that question, truthfully, my honest answer is I do not know. I'm not hanging out with Joe Dumars. I'm not picking his brain about basketball. I could not tell you. So take these numbers that I'm going to share with y'all with a little bit of a grain of salt here, because it's impossible to know if this projects to the future. But if you're looking at the current NBA, three-point shooting is important. Regardless of whether you like it or not, you think it's destroyed the game, all those things, it's important. It's as simple as that, and you need to shoot the three. And that is something that the Pelicans have really struggled with. It's partially something that they've struggled with because of roster construction. Zion doesn't shoot threes. He's your highest usage guy, right? That means you're not going to shoot a ton of threes or be a top 5, top 10 team in terms of three-point shooting. It just simply won't happen when a guy using over a third of the possessions when he's out there on the court doesn't take threes. Same thing with Brandon Ingram, right? His usage rate was just under a third last year. That means he basically ends the possession with a shot, a turnover, something like that. Fouls goes to the line, all of that. The play ends with something he did, ball in his hands kind of idea. At under a third and him not taking a ton of threes, that hurts you in that regard, right? DeJounte Murray, same kind of thing. He had a 27.3% usage rate, not a high volume 3-point shooter. This team's never going to take a ton of threes just based on how they're constructed. Doesn't mean you shouldn't shoot them. Doesn't mean there shouldn't be a target number of 40 or whatever it is for the team. But you've also got to get shooters if you want to shoot threes. And that's something they've struggled a little bit with too. And so that comes down to roster construction and vision for the team, philosophy behind what you do. And Dumars' tenure in Detroit doesn't necessarily scream he values three-point shooting. Now, the league was in very much a different spot when he was running the Pistons, right? I think one of the years I looked at in 01-02, they were 5th when it came to three-point attempts per game, and it was under 13 three-point attempts per game. Think about that, and that puts you in the top 5, right? That's kind of wild to see. A couple of the early years in Detroit, in 01-02, they ranked 5th in three-point attempts per game. That's why we're looking at kind of ranking compared to the rest of the league and not just those raw numbers, because that doesn't translate to today. In 02-03, they were 6th when it came to three-point shooting in terms of three-point attempts. The year they won the title in 03-04, they ranked 26th in three-point attempts per game. The next year they made the finals, they ranked 22nd in three-point attempts per game. Now, again, this doesn't necessarily mean a ton. I think it's worth looking at that, though, right? You didn't just, no team was placing a ton of emphasis on three-point attempts back then. So even if, you're ranking lower in there, that's something that nobody was doing a ton of or placing a massive emphasis on. So why would you build a team with that? And at that point, who really cares? And so that's a valid thing to say when you look at that team and why it wouldn't translate now, because team building is different now. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind if you hear these numbers and you start to panic and be like, well, the game has passed by. Not necessarily, right? It was just a different kind of era. So the two finals years, winning one, losing the next, was 26th and 22nd. In 05-06, they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals. They ranked 10th. The next year, 06-07, they ranked 19th. They lost the Eastern Conference Finals. The next year, they made the Eastern Conference Finals again. They were a good team for a long time. 22nd. And then you enter the real downhill era, right? So there you've got a mixed bag. You've got a couple of years in the top 10. You got one year kind of in that middle third, and then 2 years that are borderline bottom third, but kind of still right in the mix, I think, a little bit there. Then you kind of get to the downhill era where the league started trending a little bit more towards the three-point shot, not quite to the extent that we see it today, but towards the end of his tenure, it really was when the Warriors were kind of on the rise. 08-09, they ranked 28th. 09-2010, they were 26th. 2010-2011, they ranked 22nd. 11-12, they ranked 26th. 2012-2013, they ranked 24th. And then his final year there, they ranked 22nd in terms of three-point attempts. The final kind of 6 years there, they were in the bottom third every single year. That doesn't bode a ton well. Stan Van Gundy came in for the Pistons in 2014-2015. Immediately, that team jumped to 11th in three-point attempts when, you had to do that at that point in time. His next year under Stan Van Gundy, they made the playoffs. They ranked 10th in three-point shooting. They ranked 26th the next year, and they missed the playoffs, finishing 9th in the Eastern Conference. It's a mixed bag when it comes to this, but you kind of see that under Stan Van Gundy, he placed more of an emphasis on three-point shooting and broke a 7-year playoff drought in Detroit by shooting more threes. The hope is that Joe Dumars, who has been around the league a lot, working in the league office, so really paying close attention to the NBA, and I'm sure Joe Dumars would be paying close attention to the NBA, even if he wasn't in the league office when it came down to it. So if that's the case, he probably knows where the league stands. We'll know immediately where he kind of places the emphasis on this, right? One of my concerns coming away from his introductory press conference was, is he going to be looking for the right things in players? He said a lot of the right things. I'd grade his introductory press conference a B+ A- of, hey, this is a guy who clearly wants to add some toughness and grit to this team, which they are absolutely lacking and need. And Joe Dumars is the guy for that, in my opinion. I believe that. But you also need to kind of figure out the identity of this team around Zion or whomever, and three-point shooting needs to be a big part of that. So hopefully he's learned from that sort of thing. But, are you just going to build a team of real tough guys that don't shoot threes? That sounds, kind of fun and a pain in the neck to play against, but is that going to win you basketball games? And how do you kind of blend those intangible qualities that you're looking for compared to just the skill of what's their 3-point percentage? Do they take a lot of threes? Right? When he talked, he was like, I want to bring guys who kind of get Louisiana and the culture here. That doesn't win you basketball games. Skill does. Those intangibles matter. Do not get me wrong. And he even said, he's like, we can all see them. We can evaluate that. So that's good. But you've got to have kind of the other stuff with that too. And hopefully Joe Dumars is going to be looking for that. The track record, I'm pointing to the numbers on my screen here, of the history, it's a little bit in question. But that era doesn't quite translate to today's NBA. And so if he's grown, if he's learned, if he's changed, all that stuff that I'm referring to now doesn't matter because it's not relevant. So that's why it's really tough to know what type of lead executive he's going to be, if this is a lazy hire, if this is a good hire, if this is a smart hire, whatever word you want to use. It's a big question mark, right? It's a big question mark, and we won't have the answer on this for a little while. I'm going to be, it feels not like an experiment. I don't know the right word to use it. If you've got a better one, let me know in the comments down below. All right, let's end it there. That's going to do it for this week. This episode this week of Locked On Pelicans. We'll be back next week with a lot of draft coverage leading up to the lottery, a lot of Zion coverage, some things I want to get into with that as well. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.